Hey everyone, it's me, Fola Olukumbi. Don't worry, Helen is coming up. I just wanted to mention a couple of things at the start of this admittedly very long episode. Firstly, we talk about the problematic Carl Jung a lot in this episode, and I just wanted to highlight a podcast that helped me research him a lot. It's called This Jungian Life. I totally recommend it. It's, if you want to imagine the Golden Girls had found spirituality and made a podcast, only now for some reason Blanche is a man and has the voice of God. That's what it sounds like. I'll leave it up to you to investigate further if that's what you want to do. Secondly, we have a new Instagram account. I'm not going to tell you to subscribe to it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's totally up to you. But subscribe. You know it makes sense. It is amazing. I love it. I'll leave a link in the description below. And subscribe and look and go up to your heart's content. Thirdly, we do talk about the problematic behavior in this episode. So feel free to skip that section if you're sensitive to those issues. I just wanted to say that. Anyway, I've been talking way too much. This episode is way too long already. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram. And I'll leave it there and say, take it away, David Carbonara. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Old Fashioned Breakdown Podcast, a rewatch podcast for the archetypal TV show Mad Men. A bit like the Serial podcast, but with less Adnan. My name is Fola Olukumbi, and I've seen the show a couple of times. I'm trying to figure out how they write this damn thing.
And my name is Helen Varley, and this is technically my first watch through. If you enjoy this podcast, please rate, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so on Twitter, which is @breakdown_old, or email us on oldfashioned.breakdown@gmail.com. You can also now check us out on Instagram.
Woo! Like the kids. Because now this episode is we haven't done this for a while, sorry. This episode is The Mountain King, written by Matthew Weiner and Robin Veith. In this episode, Don visits an old friend, Peggy pitches a campaign all on her own, Cooper struggles with giving up the control of his empire, and Greg is a massive piece of shit.
He really is.
He really, really is. So, I guess it's been a while.
It's been a little while, yeah.
What did you think of this episode?
What did I think of this episode? I thought this episode was quite good.
Right.
I don't want to say amazing.
Okay.
I probably should say amazing a little bit more often. Now, I did enjoy it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I did enjoy it, even though it was kind of brutal. It was a kind of brutal episode.
It was.
I did enjoy the throwing of poultry. I did enjoy the outfits. I did enjoy Peggy, God, that's how long it's been, getting her own office. That was lovely.
Yep.
But there were lots of things to not like about this episode.
Oh, wow.
Like a lot of the religious stuff.
Interesting. Interesting. I like it.
Obviously the horrible rapey bits. Not nice.
I wasn't sure how you were going to take all that stuff, so I was kind of.
Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, I feel like we should probably talk about that first, because before I watched this episode, Fola was like, "There's something really shocking happens." Right, and it is shocking. Don't get me wrong, but it's not surprising.
Right. Me. Okay.
It's not surprising.
Interesting. Why not?
I think. Well, I mean, you got to think like back in the time.
Yes.
I mean, when this was. I mean, actually, are they married yet or not?
No, not yet.
They're not married, because at the time period this was filmed, I mean, it was still legal to rape your wife,
which is nuts.
So I mean, that's why it's not shocking to me. Is the absolute misogyny and like the horrible things that women went through in this time period was just like, and that's why I'm not surprised, because men were shitbags because they had all the power.
As they shit. Well, there you go. power. Interesting.
Oh, what did you think of this episode, Fola?
So, God, there's so much to say about it. Do I say that every week? I don't know. So the main thing I want to say about it is like I've always been interested in the titles.
I didn't get the title for this at all.
Okay.
I know it was the song that he was playing on the piano.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it.
Okay. So the title for me is basically the key to not just this episode, but like the whole of this season. And I know you can't remember anything.
I can't remember anything else. I'm sorry. My memory doesn't last that long.
That's kind of my fault. I'm sorry. There's been so long since the last episode. But this whole season is kind of, I think, summed up mainly by this, not fully by this, but mainly by the title to this episode. And I want to, before I go into it fully, I want to tell you about a guy called Carl Gustaf Jung. Basically, he worked with Freud, the very famous guy.
That Freud, yeah.
That Freud, yeah. And they were very kind of close. He almost saw Freud as like a father figure, but they were very, very close. Then they had a bit of a falling out. And he went off and did his own, created his own method of psychology. And he came up with a bunch. He's well known for a bunch of like key concepts. Like he's known for the idea of archetypes and the idea of this thing. I think I mentioned it ages ago in another podcast. The Anima and the animus, which is like within each man and each woman there is an opposite. So like in each man there's a woman, and each woman there's a man. So it's kind of like a psychological thing. And this thing called complexes, which are like complexes are kind of like something that happened to you in your childhood that affects you as you're an adult. So like say you got bitten by a dog, you'd have a dog complex.
Yeah.
You'd have emotions and feelings connected to dogs as you get older. So he came up with things like complexes, extroversion, introversion, things like personas, and an incredible thing called a shadow personality, which is like the opposite of how you see yourself. So you kind of like the shadow of your personality is the thing that you hide from, but you need to kind of embrace it in order to move on in life. And synchronicity, which is kind of sort of mysticism, sort of like things that just kind of happen, sort of coincidences in life kind of thing. Right. So he kind of came up with all these concepts. And all of those concepts, all of those ideas are basically in this episode. And the big thing about Carl Jung is he was born in the Swiss Alps.
Okay.
The Mountain King. The Swiss Alps.
Right.
And also, not only that, the Mountain King, the title of the Mountain King comes from... it's the music they were playing.
Yeah.
It's from this story called Peer Gynt.
Right.
It's sort of like an old fairy tale, an old Swedish fairy tale.
Okay.
And part of that story is Peer Gynt gets kind of trapped in this troll kingdom, and he meets this troll lady, and the Mountain King, who's in the story, her father tries to get him to marry her. Right. And he runs away, and like when he's running away, that's when the music starts playing, and that music that you hear in the show starts playing. Ah. Which is funny. I was talking about archetypes, that this Carl Jung sort of like deals with archetypes. Mm-hmm. Well, that story is kind of an archetype of something that happened in Mad Men that you've probably completely forgotten about.
Yes. That is correct.
So in the last episode that we watched like 6 months ago, do you remember the jet set? So Don meets that pretty girl called Joy. He gets to know Joy. And then her dad tries to set them up, the two of them up together. And then he kind of like just leaves. Remember when he's in the swimming pool and there's two people kissing?
Oh, hang on. The jet set, is that the one that we just watched?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the one.
I thought you were going like, oh my gosh. I thought you were going back to like series 1 then. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, because wasn't the last time we saw Don before this episode, He got into the car with that woman and drove off.
Not quite. The last time we saw him was he just phoned someone on the phone. He was sitting on a chair. He just phoned someone on the phone and said, "I'm coming to see you." He'd ripped out the back of the book and said, "I'm coming to see you," and then it ended. And my point is basically that Peer Gynt story about the guy running away from the troll princess is exactly what happened.
Very
here.
clever.
It's an archetype, right? It's an
See, here's the thing.
Yep.
Right? Nobody, apart from you and Matthew, our friend Matthew Weiner, nobody would know that.
people have noticed it. People have noticed it.
Well, okay, but I represent the average human in this scenario. We wouldn't know that, and okay, but you know, that's cool. But I'm just a bit like, I never would have got there on my own.
No worries, I don't think you're supposed to. Anyway, and just one more thing on Carl Jung before we go into the actual episode. I said that, like, I think this whole season is based on Carl Jung's ideas, right?
Okay.
Not maybe not fully based on, but like incorporated into the show. So still kind of like using the ideas of Jacques Lacan. The reason I think this is because the first episode of this season, the title of that show was For Those Who Think Young.
You cracked the code.
I cracked the code. There we go.
Congratulations.
Let's start with the first scene. So we got the first scene where Betty is having a go at Sally. Like, what did you get anything from this scene when you were watching it? Did you feel anything? Did you kind of?
I felt that Betty was a bitch.
Right. Okay.
I don't know. It's a funny one because it's kind of like, I guess you feel a little bit sorry for her, but at the same time, she's sort of really mean to her kids.
Yeah.
And also she sort of like what did she say? I'm not your, pick up your truck, I'm not your slave. Or
she
something.
did say that, yeah, she did.
I'm just a bit like, yeah, but you're their mum. Yeah. And yeah, you shouldn't have to pick up off them all the time, but they're like little kids and their dads just left. So,
yeah,
you know, bit of kindness, Betty, wouldn't go amiss.
One of the things about this episode that's interesting, obviously, again, the whole Mountain King sort of title. The Mountain King was like, it's quite a domineering figure, right? The good king is one of the archetypes that Carl Jung talks about. It's like, and it's basically an archetype of masculinity, and it's like how men kind of archetypally think that they're supposed to act. His idea was that deep within all human beings is this idea of masculinity, and that masculinity is kind of presented itself through the idea of the good king. And what we see here with Betty is like her sort of being this powering, domineering person over her daughter, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting that at one point she tells Bobby, the son, to go upstairs, almost like sending him up to the top of the mountain kind of thing, if you see what I mean. But also in this scene is this idea of shame, like where she shames Sally for smoking the cigarettes.
Oh yeah, I forgot Sally was caught smoking in the bathroom.
And Sally's kind of quite sort of angry about everything, and sort of like tries to shame Betty back, but doesn't quite come off. But it's interesting that she talks about her father and stuff. And how much she misses him and how much she wants him to be there, because that's like the animus sort of thing. But yeah, that's I just think it's really, and also there's the thing with the whole scene starts with the camera sort of zooming in as Betty's walking around. You see the door, like there's a lot of doors in this episode. There's a lot of doors in the whole season, but there's specifically in this episode.
That's the shot that stuck in my mind, was that shot with the truck in the front, and then like she's almost like through the doorway. Yeah, that's kind of the one that stuck with me, which is surprising considering it was like an 8-year-old smoking a cigarette. But there was some strong camera work there.
There's a lot of strong camera work in this episode. So yeah, it just sets things up in terms of what we're going to be talking about. And like, one thing that I've realized while watching this episode is there's always, in each scene, like the scene afterwards always refers to the previous scene in some sort of subtextual way.
Oh, okay.
So the next scene we see is Don getting off the bus, And how does that relate to the previous scene? They're talking about Dawn, and we see Dawn get off the bus. And it's almost like it's like Sally's kind of looking for another. She's looking for Dawn as a parent, right? But Dawn is also looking like Dawn has been sort of cast off by Betty, and he's also looking for another parent.
Yeah.
See that kind of that thing. I'd ask you what you think about.
I'd say, yeah. Well, okay. I'd say Don is more looking for himself.
True.
That's what I'd say. That's why he goes to find Anna.
Okay.
Because he's searching for his true self.
True. I would say there is that in there. But within looking, we'll get into it a bit more later.
Like an onion, so many layers.
We'll get to that a bit later. But there is, I think, part of him looking for himself is finding another person that kind of makes him feel whole. So, like, part of...
Well, yeah, if you skip to the end of the episode, that's basically what she says to him, isn't it? But the thing is, I guess, with the Anna character is that he is himself with her.
Yes.
More than anyone else.
And
he admits that.
Yes. This is
to her. So, without wanting to skip ahead, I kind of feel like he's looking for himself in someone that knows who he really is.
Yeah, that's true. It's also, do you think it's interesting that, or maybe it's just this is just a me thing, but like, I find it interesting that Betty, so many names in the show. Betty and Anna have the same color hair. I know that could just be a coincidence.
I honestly, you're either blonde, brunette, or redhead.
This is true.
Generally.
This is true.
So
this is true.
And it was fashionable at the time.
This is very true. So
I wouldn't read too much. I did. Do you know what though?
What?
You say that, but actually there was one shot where she was wearing like a really puffy.
And she looked at that. Like...
She looked like Betty in that shot. Yeah.
Okay. I'd ask you more about this Don getting off the bus thing, but I imagine there's not much you want to say about it.
Well, you don't have to ask. You can ask me, but I don't really. That hasn't stuck in my mind.
Right.
So.
Okay. So the next scene is when there's a meeting in Peggy's cramped office with Sal and Ken.
I liked it.
And like I said, like everything kind of, all the scenes seem to relate to the previous scene. And in this scene, I think, well, what did you think of this scene first?
I really like this scene, just because I quite like the discussion about popsicles. I think it's quite, comedic that it was in that office.
Yeah.
And that man was getting upset about his Xerox machine and all this sort of stuff.
On.
I know, but you know what I mean? It's like they've obviously been in and messed it up, haven't they?
Yeah.
And I like that she bought them some booze,
yep.
to make them feel at home. And I just think I kind of liked how they came to the idea together.
Yeah.
This was the first scene that I guess I kind of saw the religious connotations of what this episode was going to be. If there were any prior, I did not pick up on them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely felt like, oh, ice lollies are like communion. And I'm just like, what? But of course we don't have those lollies in the UK, do we?
We do. I think we do.
I've never seen them.
Oh, I have. I've definitely had one. I haven't had probably since I lived in Bradford, but I haven't had.
Did they have the two sticks still?
Yeah.
So I've never seen those in the UK.
I'm a bit older than you, so maybe it's just something from the 80s that you don't remember.
Maybe it's from the dark ages. So I really like that. I really liked how they came together and came up with this. It felt quite like a nice, happy scene for a fucking change on this show.
It's you mentioned so many things there that were really cool, like this whole idea of Christianity that was in the scene. And it's such a weird thing that's in this episode, just like dropped in out of nowhere.
Oh, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
It feels so weird. But that's another thing that links it to Carl Jung. Because Carl Jung was basically brought up a Christian and believed very much in Christianity, even though he was a psychologist. Carl Jung is basically the guy who's responsible for... Have you heard of the Hero of 1,000 Faces?
No.
Have you heard of the hero's journey? Have you heard of Star Wars?
Yes.
Okay. So Star Wars is based on the idea of the hero's journey, which came from a book written by a guy called Joseph Campbell called The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And he based his entire book, his entire philosophy, on the psychology of Carl Jung.
Right.
And so he's a huge influence on Western culture, basically. And he started his whole sort of anthropological analysis looking at all religions around the world and found similar beats within all these religions, and then kind of like gave up on all of that and then came back to America and just studied Christianity because he knew Christianity because he was a Christian. So a lot of the stuff that he talks about infuses a lot of Christianity in it, which is obviously how we see throughout the season all these different Christian things coming into it. I was completely wrong. I thought it was like the name of the Father stuff, but actually it was more this kind of Christianity kind of pull from Carl Jung sort of coming into everything, I think. Anyway, we get that kind of thing, but what I really like about this scene in relation to the previous two scenes is this idea that Ken and Peggy are like the parents and Sal's like the kid.
I did not pick up on that.
So Sal's kind of like in the background, sort of like just coming along with everything, and sort of like I think he's the one that kind of says something about the pops and how his mum and dad used to kind of give him pops.
Yeah, doesn't he say something like, "Oh, it's like taking bread at communion" or something? Yeah. Sharing bread at communion.
Yeah, and then Ken, who's in the scene, who's really nice and like is involved in the scene, and he's like he wants to be there and stuff. Kind of at the same time, he's also being a bit of a dick, and he's also being quite critical of everything and quite domineering and quite sort of like, I don't want to be here. I think that's a dumb idea and all this kind of stuff. But then you have this. And if you think of him as the father, you can think of Peggy as this kind of mother figure they're both on like equal sort of footing. And she can say to him like, no, I agree with Sal. That's a good idea. And it's kind of them all working, like you say, all them working together as like...
But, wait. Right? So what religion is Ken?
I don't know.
Right? Because that's what you could look at. Because Sal is remembering his Christian upbringing.
Yeah.
Peggy remembers her Catholic upbringing.
Yeah, okay.
And he's non-religious.
Okay.
So the two of those, like Sal and Peggy, can understand this, whereas Ken can't.
That's totally valid as well. I don't
know why you put in a marriage.
No, because the reason I'm saying that is because it's like they work as a family unit. It's like I think to me, there's something parental about the way they're looking after Sal's feelings, or the way that Sal has this idea and it gets kind of not pulled apart, but kind of like looked at from different angles. So obviously Ken thinks it's like it's weird and bad and all this kind of stuff, and Peggy's just kind of, like I said, on an equal footing with him and quite maternal in sort of protecting his feelings. She's kind of like, no, I can see it working. I can see what you mean by that. That's what it means to me. I could be wrong. And also...
I don't think that there's no such thing as wrong.
Fair enough.
Just putting it out there.
And then there's one thing I want to mention as well, the thing about the pops and the reason they use pops. Like, you remember I was talking about the cold and hot media? No. Well, hopefully the listeners remember, because you can just go back to the last podcast or whenever I mentioned it. But anyway, I was saying that cold media is like a female thing, where it's like it involves a lot of interaction and a lot of people working together, and warm media. This is like it's by the guy, what's his name, Malcolm McLuhan. And warm media, hot media is basically it doesn't require as much interaction with it. It's like, how men kind of go off and do their own thing without actually talking to anyone, just think they can do everything by themselves. It's that kind of like dichotomy. So anytime you see coldness in the show, it kind of denotes some sort of feminine power. And when you see something really hot, remember the episode Indian Summer? Yeah. And when everybody's like really hot and everyone's like really warm, and Don was like cheating on his wife and it gotten everything he wanted. So it's kind of like, anytime you see something hot happen, usually Don's winning. Anytime you see something cold happen, usually Betty's winning. So that's that. Is there anything else you want to say about that scene?
Nope.
Okay, cool. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, so this is like a really short scene, but Pete mentions something in this scene that I want to go into in a bit of detail. So this is when Pete was kind of, he comes in eating a candy bar.
Yeah.
And he tries to, and Hildy tells him about
the adoption phone call.
Yeah. So what did you think of this? I thought this was funny. There's so much funny stuff in
Do you know what, though? I have to say, I kind of like Pete more and more these days. Like, I actually don't feel like he was a dickhead this episode.
Right, okay, interesting.
I feel like he was... I mean, don't get me wrong, he's dramatic.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's a dickhead.
Right.
I think he was a bit blindsided. I mean, it's interesting that she immediately assumed that he was considering this adoption.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a whole lot. I did notice that he was eating a candy bar.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what it was, and I don't know if I have a whole lot to say about it.
Okay, that's all right. It's kind of a short scene, and I didn't have much to say about it until I kind of stared at it for ages, like a massive nerd. For me, the theme of this scene is basically persona and complex. So like you've got first of all you got Pete putting on this persona of knowing what's going on, being an adult, which is kind of denoted by him eating the candy bar. Kind of for me represents some sort of control, pretending to be in control. And the idea of him. So in the scene, he mentions this guy Bert Peterson.
Yeah.
And he's really pissed off about Bert Peterson. We don't know why he's pissed off about Bert Peterson. It's almost like he has a complex about Bert Peterson, right? It's like he has these feelings attached to Bert Peterson that we don't really know what they are. They're just there in the ether, and he just, anytime he hears that name, he wishes he would die, right? Mm-hmm. So there's kind of all that stuff. And in the scene before, Peggy says something about how she picks up the poster from A Night. You remember the A Night to Remember thing when she made that poster and they were all sort of...
Yeah.
That episode was called A Night to Remember, which, if you take the idea of memory into consideration, that's how complexes are created, through like our sort of hidden memories, right? So that's a nod to that. But the thing I want to point out in this episode, in this scene, is Pete mentions offhandedly IBM.
Okay.
The company IBM.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out why he mentioned IBM, and literally so many things happened in IBM that kind of reflect the themes of this episode. It's kind of astounding that he would just mention that and then they just move on without even making a big deal out of it. So IBM stands for International Business Machines, which is how in the show humans are expected to behave. But like if you take, for instance, Peggy and the photocopy machine.
Yeah. So
Peggy's expected to be this kind of worker, but like she obviously is a human being, so she kind of steps out of that role. But that's how, capitalism expects us to behave, I guess. IBM was the name of what was originally called CTR, but even though the company changed names, it still has the elements that it had when it was called CTR. So that's like human beings, we can kind of change, but we're still the same internally if we want to be. IBM was made up of lots of different types of companies, which is kind of like how complexes work. There's loads of stuff. I don't want to go through more because I'm starting to see your eyes getting a bit heavy. but basically, IBM has a massive thematic resonance with this episode. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I'm aware that sometimes when it's not. I mean, that was, to be honest, I just didn't really get what you were on about. So I'm sorry if my eyes glazed over.
No, it's good. It means I know what the audience is thinking when I'm talking bollocks. So it's good. It's fine. It's fine.
Sorry if anyone really wanted to hear the rest of that. If there was more.
If you want to hear more, just email me. Let's move on to the next scene.
Okay.
So this is kind of, I don't know. I guess I found these scenes a bit, I guess because they're older people and that's not.
Oh, is
off
this
the
the bloody bird? Like,
Bert and
you
his
just
sister.
every time I look at him, I just think he's the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken every single time.
This is the one with.
Is
him.
he supposed to be like look like? Is that like one of Matthew Weiner's things?
I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. Maybe that'll come up in later episodes. Who knows? This is the one where he meets his sister to discuss the merger and iron out any issues with this merger with what they called Putnam Powell and whatever they're called. I can't remember what they're called now.
It was a boring scene.
It was a bit. It was. I wouldn't say it was boring, but I guess it's kind of because they're kind of older people. You can kind of take yourself out of it a bit. Because we're so young and cool, that we just kind of...
As a character, like, I don't know, I feel like with him, he's always had kind of a bit of a comedic role. You know, like, he's a bit nutty and he sort of walks around without his shoes on because he's like his Japanese stuff. And this is the first time you see him in kind of a bit more of a... I mean, I might have forgotten, but the first time I've ever seen him in more of like a sort of woe is him kind of situation. And I don't know, I just really struggled to find any empathy for him.
That's interesting.
And I just kind of, I guess it was that, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it's not like he's gonna lose anything.
He's another mountain king, isn't he? He's like, I guess he's
he's stuck at the top of the mountain though.
Well, he's not though. That's the point. I think because he's about to lose, I think part of the thing of the good king in terms of the archetypal Carl Jung's archetype is at some point the good king has to give up his kingdom. He has to move on. He has to grow up, and that's kind of what's happening to Cooper.
But I don't know if it is that. I mean, I like that link to the Mountain King because obviously one of the things that he said is it might have been later on. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to be like the Queen of England."
Yeah, he said that in this scene.
This scene,
yeah,
and I think that's quite interesting because I guess it is that whole thing of you're a ruler. You have you know, fortune, and everyone thinks of you as this great figure.
Yeah.
But actually, you have no power.
Yeah.
And is that what he really is going to miss having? Because actually, if you think about it like that, like the king of a mountain surely doesn't have that much power. I don't know the story, but like, I mean, if you're a king of a mountain, like the mountain is bigger than you are. If you see what I mean. Well,
that's a very good point, actually. I think that might come up later on in the very final scene.
To be continued.
In terms of the previous scene and how this relates to the previous scene, Pete projects his frustration onto Bert Peterson, but in this scene, Cooper projects his maternal need onto his sister Alice. That's what I put.
His maternal need.
Yeah, his need for like a mother figure. So he's kind of like trying to please
all these
his
fucking
sister.
men just need to get a grip. Sorry. But it's like they all want mums and wives and
yeah, I know.
Like, look at Peggy, right? Look at her going for it.
Well, we'll talk about that a bit as well. Okay, so moving on to the next scene because that scene's kind of that's not the best scene of the show. It's still a good scene though. I just want to point out if the guy who plays Cooper is listening, we still like the scene and we still. I mean,
is he still alive?
Yes, he's still alive. He's actually very funny.
He wasn't in that scene.
in a flashback, Anna confronts Don / Dick about stealing her husband's identity. Now this is kind of a long scene and a load of stuff happens in it.
So I have questions before we begin.
Go on.
The first is, have we seen her before?
Yes.
Okay. When did we see her before? Because I did think I recognise her, but I don't know who she is.
So the first time we saw her was when Don was trying to buy a car and then changed his mind. And he had a flashback where he was in the car sales shop or whatever. And he's about to sell a car to this man and his son. And he looks out of the window and he sees her outside.
Oh.
And then she comes in and she says, you're not who you say you are. I know who you really are.
Because I had like a.
It's in the gold violin.
But we've not seen her in this environment before, in that little room. No. Because I didn't get at first that it was a flashback.
Ah, interesting.
I was just kind of like,
there's a lot of that.
I thought because he went to the house in the scene where he gets off the bus.
Yeah.
Knocked on the door.
Yeah.
And then and then the next time we see him, he's in this apartment. So I didn't twig straight away that it was a flashback.
I think that's another Carl Jung thing, where the idea of, so if you think about complexes hit you when you're a kid, but they stick with you all through your life. So it's almost like time doesn't exist. It's almost like what happened to you then is still happening to you now. And that's kind of like how the time works in this episode, where you're never really sure where Don is in terms of time period. He could be in the past, he could be now.
And that to me feels very true for this episode, because like after I pegged that it was a flashback, every time Don was there, I was like, is it present Don or past Don?
Yeah, exactly.
And because it did kind of, because I was a bit like, what? Why are they talking about this? Like, this is really random. And then she said, because he came in and she was sort of going like, why are you lying to me? And I'm like, because I don't really remember what happened in the last episode. I was like, what happened here then? Yeah. And then when she's like, you're not Don Draper, and I was like, oh, this has to be a flashback.
Yeah. And I think that idea of complexes and how we sort of like try to keep the past in the past and try not to sort of try and move away from it, run away from it. That's basically why that song is playing before the scene. Because obviously in Peer Gynt, that's when he's running down the hall to get away from the Troll King. So many kings. And in this scene, and in this scene, he's like literally trying to get rid of Anna. He's running away. He's like trying to hide. So and it's interesting that it's all kind of in the shadow. It's all kind of quite a dark scene as well.
Yeah, I was like, where the hell are they? It's like last time we saw him, it was like sunshine and rainbows, and now it's and you know, I think because there were some things I was trying to figure out time wise, because she said it's been 7 years at one point, so I'm assuming that means 7 years since she last saw Don, or 7 years since the war. I'm unclear.
I think it's 7 years since she saw her husband.
Yeah,
but 7 years is a basically a time of like. You know what they say about relationships and how they last 7 years and like how things change after 7 years. And I think that's kind of ties into the whole theme as well.
I mean, there is a thing in this scene, I guess, and a little bit of a theme, I guess, throughout the episode of sort of facing your fears in some ways.
Yeah, totally.
And it's very much that Don has been running away from this, hiding from this.
Yeah.
And then when he faces it, which not all of the characters do face their fear, I think.
If he does face it, but...
well, exactly. I mean, I think... Well, he kind of does face it in that he tells her the truth.
Well, we'll see when we get to that. He tells her something. But
he did. But no. I don't understand. Because he did... Because the real Don Draper...
Oh, when he tells her about...
the real Don Draper died.
Right,
and he took his identity.
Right, he did
that
tell
part
her.
Is true.
Yeah.
And he tells her that.
He does.
And he tells her why. Sort of why, not fully why.
Yeah. But it's interesting that he tells her that, and then they become really close friends.
Exactly. And I think that's what's interesting about the whole face your fear thing, is because some of the characters don't face it.
Yeah.
Or they just sort of... Because, I mean, I think he sort of faces it, and then he gets the outcome that he couldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
That actually, rather than being detrimental to him, is actually a huge asset for him going forward.
Yeah.
And when others face their fears or see their fears visualized, do not have the same.
There's also the thing that when he does kind of tell her what happened, she ends the scene by saying, "What are we gonna do with you?" Or "What am I gonna do with you?"
Yeah.
As if like by telling her the truth. Although it's not made massively explicit, but by telling her the truth, now he's kind of almost indebted to her, and now she can do whatever she wants with him, almost like a king.
Well, I think he feels like that. Yeah, like a king.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I think there's an element of truth in that.
So the next scene is basically almost like the exact opposite of that scene, where everything was dark in the first scene. The next scene is where Don actually walks into the current timeline, and he goes into the house, and everything's really bright and really sort of like light and stuff. Yeah. And you've got that kid playing the piano.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, do they have a kid together? That's where my mind went. I was like, oh shit, that's such a plot twist. No, but it's not his child.
Yeah.
But it was very like, that's what I mean, is that I guess I can see where you're thinking with Betty at that moment, because she is very like, housewifey teaching the kid piano.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. It's very sweet. She's dressed in one of those poofy 50 skirts, like.
And there's this, well, for me, I see the little kid as almost like, it's almost like a Dawn character. Like she's looking after this kid, and then Dawn comes in and she looks after Dawn in the same sort of way. It's almost like that room that she's in is like this kind of, you could see it as a reception for a therapist. And she just sits down and they sit down next to each other. But like, so I go through this show like with a fine-tooth comb, like way too much. Like I pay too much attention to the details, right? And to the point where I'm looking at like individual bits of dialogue and stuff. And going through the dialogue, to me, and you won't agree with this, but I'm going to say it anyway, it almost seemed like there was a weird thing from Anna in how she responded to him being there. Now, on the surface, it looked like she's very happy for him to be there. She's being really nice to him and everything. But underneath that, there was a sense that she kind of, she was almost not sure why he was there, and she didn't really want him to be there, and she was just kind of like being as nice and as hospitable as she could be. She was being nice, she cared, but she was just kind of like, okay, what do I have to do? Now this guy's here who's paid for all this stuff. What do I have to do to just kind of like keep him happy?
I mean, I actually would agree with that.
Oh,
because,
really?
I mean, reflecting on later episodes, I mean, later moments in the show, you know, she says later on, after he asked for a divorce, we can't spend Christmas together. It's almost like that's a release.
Yeah, right, okay.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like there's a point later on that comes where she thinks she's been released.
Right.
And she hasn't.
Interesting.
And it's that whole thing of, you know, sort of loyalty and duty and,
yeah,
you know.
I feel like in this scene there's a bit of a power struggle as well. Like Don's kind of just turned up and he's like, can I have a shower? Can I do all this stuff? And he's like making himself at home. And she's kind of like, not showing it, but kind of like, okay, you can do all these things, but, you know, trying to get him to sort of speak about his problems. And he doesn't really want, and he basically treats her like he treats Betty. In that, you know, when he comes home from work, he's like, he just wants to go upstairs. And,
I think he's a bit nicer to her than he is to Betty.
well, yeah, totally. But underneath that, there's this kind of like, I'm the man of the house. I can, you know, I'll do what I want. Even though he's being nice about it, and he's being kind of like, obviously she's not Betty, she's a different person. But there's like this underlining kind of foot under the table kind of thing. I'm home sort of thing. That's what I got from it anyway.
I mean, I don't know if he. That's tricky for me.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say he feels like he's coming home.
Right.
I don't think he really sees it that way.
No. I like I said, this is kind of. I'm not saying this is exactly how he's thinking consciously. I'm thinking.
But I think that you are right in saying he has a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, that's a really good word of putting it, actually. Yeah, that's what I mean. I think entitlement's a really good word. Anyway, so we move on. So this is the first scene in a bunch of scenes that all seem to echo each other. Yeah. So then we've got the scene with Pete and Trudy, and Pete comes in the door, boom, knocks the door down.
Hell's bells, Trudy! That is my quote of the week. Hell's bells, Trudy!
But this is such a cool scene.
It's such a great scene.
She's like, and he's obviously shouting and screaming that, you know, we're not doing this. What did you think?
I just thought it was great. I love that he stuck up for himself, because that's one of the things that he sort of hasn't really done.
Interesting that you say he stuck up for himself.
He did stand up for himself.
I'm not saying, I'm not disagreeing, but it's interesting you say that, because I think the opposite.
You think what?
I think Trudy stuck up for herself.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like you can't come in with a line like "Hell's bells, Trudy," and not be standing up for yourself.
It's just that but this is the point. I think this is the real point about this. It's like I was saying about the earlier scene with Ken and Peggy, right? In this kind of equal relationship, But this is like a very equal relationship, even though they're screaming at each
Oh,
other.
it's not. It's no. This has never been an equal relationship.
Okay.
Like there has always been a thing with her parents where she wants to live, what she wants to do.
Oh, okay.
This is not. No. I mean, Pete's always just kind of gone along with everything.
Interesting. That's really, because I guess from my point of view, you make a good point. That's a really, really good point. From my point of view, it was like he came in and he was very sort of like aggressive, which is kind of a big part of Carl Jung's thing, I think. It's like, aggression could be seen as a bad thing, but it's like owning that shadow, that sort of dark side of yourself and being able to control it, right? And he comes in like that, and then she's very kind of the same, sort of like angry and just kind of, they clash together really well. And also we have this whole thing with the chicken being thrown out of the window.
So good. I love that. I was like, no, he's not. And then when he threw the plate as well, I was like, holy shit, you're going to annoy Trudy so much.
and to get a bit like subtextual about it, for me, the chicken is very much a feminine, motherly kind of image. And the window, even though it's not quite a window, for me is like a masculine sort of, it's almost like a masculine door, right? And it's like him throwing his feminine thing out of the window. I don't know what it means. It means something around those things.
Most chickens that people eat are male chickens.
Yeah, I know. But it doesn't matter. I was gonna say something about chickens being male, but I'm sure that's a rooster. But it doesn't matter. We can move on. Because the way he ends this scene, I was saying about ice and cold things. The scene ends with him putting the ice in the glass, and it's very much sort of like you just said. Trudy is pretty much in control. I see. So I guess how I'd translate that scene if I were a philosopher or whatever, I think I would probably say it was him rather than throwing his own his feminine side out or whatever you said. Yeah.
I would say that scene was about him rejecting the conventional traditional American family life.
Okay.
Because I think with Trudy, her thing is she doesn't understand, she's never understood why he wouldn't want the things that she wants.
Okay.
Because that's the kind of traditional pathway,
right.
I guess, right? So he comes home and it's so conventional. She's got the tea on the table ready for him.
Big puffy dress.
Big puffy dress. Yeah, she looks nice. She's all ready for her husband to come home to her. She's made these appointments because she's so busy. Yeah. She's being the perfect wife.
Yeah.
And she can't understand why he doesn't want that. And it's the same thing we had with the apartment.
Yeah.
She couldn't understand why he wouldn't want to live in an apartment that he couldn't afford.
Cool.
Even though it was supplemented by her family or whatever the deal was. I can't remember now, but... and I think this got to a point where Pete was like, this isn't what I want. And that's why he throws the chicken, because that's the traditional family dinner, isn't it? The roast chicken. He could have thrown out the mashed potatoes as well later on and we just didn't see it.
No.
But the fact that he threw out the china as well, I think is, because that's such a big thing in America. There would be family china.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was him rejecting the whole, this is not what I want, because... I'm not even sure if he wants a kid.
Right. Interesting.
Whether it's adopted or not, I'm just not sure.
That's really cool. That's a really, really good read. Yeah, I don't disagree at all. There's all of that stuff makes total sense, even as it goes on in the rest of the episode. But then we've got the third part of this. Actually, I think there's 4 parts to this, and this is the third part. We've got Greg and Joan in bed. And Greg turning Joan down.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to say anything about the scene, if I was going to try and figure out what it was about, is it that, back then, I'm sure it wasn't normal for a woman to be on top.
Yep.
And she was assuming a more masculine position.
Yep.
A more independent position potentially, and
she's being
that. He likes submissive.
This is
Greg.
The total opposite of the scene before, then, right? In terms of your Pete is eventually seems to accept. Well, later on in the episode, he seems to accept that even though he doesn't want all those things, he's lumbered with it and he has to deal with it. And here, Greg is, nope, I'm the man. And if we're going to have sex, we're going to have sex when I want to have it, which we'll go into a bit later. It's interesting that this scene starts off with, it has that $1 Million Movie thing. I don't know if you remember this, like black and white. So it shows the TV. There's a $1 Million Movie thing. It's like a TV. It's like a thing that they used to show in America where they'd show like the same movie like every day, twice a day for a month or a week or something like that. So it's just like this like repetitive thing. But also the film that they're showing is The Day the Earth Stood Still. So it's kind of like, so there's this thing, I don't know if it's particularly a Carl Jung thing, but this idea of stagnation and how, you know, when we're psychologically battled a lot, we can be, the worst thing that can happen is, I did a whole podcast on the end of The Sopranos, and I know you haven't seen Sopranos, but the real villain or the real sort of bad thing in The Sopranos is the idea that you just give up. You just don't care anymore. And I think that's kind of what finish the sentence. And I think that's kind of what this whole the Day the Earth Stood Still is. It's kind of, it's almost it's like almost pre-showing what happens to it's showing what's happened to their relationship, where it's become stagnant because Greg is a big douchebag and Joan wants to move things along. She wants to keep things going. Moving on. So we see, and this scene kind of ends with them like being in the same bed but being like physically apart, unlike the first scene with Don and Anna being sat really close together. So it's kind of like we've gone through the gamut, where at the end of the Peggy, the Trudy and Pete scene, they're in totally different rooms. And now we've got two people in the same space, but like completely emotionally apart, right? And then the next scene is this very silent single scene of Peggy lighting a cigarette and standing in the office alone at night. And
didn't even register that.
It's a really important scene.
Oh shit! Sorry. I must have got a text message or something. Sorry.
Well, I think it's really important because it's like Peggy is now, for me this is like, and it's not just Peggy on her own in the office, like on like in this high sort of building, like she can see the whole New York skyline. She's in a silhouette. It's like she's in her shadow. She's smoking a cigarette like Sally at the beginning of the episode. Sally's kind of like smoking, but she's not allowed to smoke. Peggy, who she smoked, but she doesn't smoke that often. This is like the first time she smoked like confidently, and she's smoking and she's at the top. She is literally in this moment the Mountain King.
Okay, do you think? Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head.
Okay.
Do you think there's like something symbolic about booze and alcohol in this episode?
Yes.
Booze and cigarettes in this episode, because like if we go back to so there's the smoking at the beginning.
Yes.
Then when you have the boring scene with Cooper and his sister, mm-hmm. like she has a drink and he doesn't.
All right, yeah, okay, I didn't notice that.
But you know what she says to the guy, "Do you mind if would you mind if I drink?" And he's like, "I'm not going to tell on you" or something. And she orders a vermouth from the Cleveland
won't tell anyone. I think it's more to do with the word Cleveland, which I don't fully understand, but Cleveland comes up a lot. But yeah, drink is a big thing in the show.
Because the characters, I mean, even then after Pete and Trudy argue, he has a drink.
He does, yeah, he does.
So it's like,
I think that's more to do with the ice, but yeah, the alcohol is a thing. I think for me, and this is just me, and this might be wrong. For me, cigarettes are almost like a distraction. Like, so when you do something that maybe is out of character or something that's very difficult, you have a cigarette. Mm-hmm. So the characters have cigarettes. And drinking alcohol has something to do with people who aren't really close, or people who sort of hide some sort of negativity by having a drink. So like it's like a friendship thing. You only see people who don't really know each other well drinking. Or at least trying to sort of paper over any kind of problems that they have with drink, basically. That's what I think. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, so she has she lights a cigarette. She stands and she's like does like a big stretch, and she's kind of like in her shadow, and she's kind of she is in that moment the Mountain King, and it's kind of all looking very good for her. And this is contrasted with the 3 scenes before where these people are trying to sort of work together, and there's things or problems with all of them. And obviously Peggy is very much whole because she's embraced her shadow, and she's like almost like the uber person in the whole show, because she's the only one that can actually deal with her problems on her own, because she's almost ascended to another plane of kind of consciousness. I don't know. Anyway, it's weird because the thing about Carl Jung is like, even though he thought of himself as like a scientist, he's basically a mystic. He's all about chime. Like you see, like Anna, when they in the next scene when we see them, like Anna's sitting out on her porch, and we hear all the chime bells and all the kind of like signs of mysticism, and it's kind of all, to me, all evokes the idea of Carl Jung and how what he was all about. Anyway, so that's the next scene. Basically, it's Don and Anna sitting on watching the ocean, and it's the scene where Don kind of confesses about lots of stuff, and it's the scene where she where he finds out he's wearing another man's pants and all this kind of stuff. What did you think? Any big things that come to mind?
No, I mean, I think you just see, for me, I mean, you'll probably have loads of theories, but I don't know, I just got that this is the first time we've sort of really seen that kind of honest relationship.
Right.
Don having like an honest relationship with a person that wasn't based on wanting something off them, or I don't know, because he said he sort of alludes to the fact that he feels like Anna knows more about him than his wife, which is true.
Yeah.
And then she says, "Oh, she doesn't have to know everything about you, and you don't have to know everything about her." Yeah,
I don't really get that line, but for me, I guess this is more about what I was talking about. Sorry, go on.
I think that line probably translates a bit to them as well. Like,
okay,
she's almost setting a boundary on him. Like,
right. Okay.
You see, it's like she knows this huge secret about him, but that doesn't mean that she needs to know everything about him. Do you see what I mean?
That's that actually does feed into what I was going to say, which is, so this scene for me moves along the idea of Peggy being on her own and sort of being Peggy being on her own in this scene, like stretching and stuff, like being and like sort of accepting herself and like being able to comfort herself. And Don needs Anna. Don needs to kind of like be with someone to kind of feel whole. So he needs to kind of explain. He needs to be. He's not individuated, which is a Carl Jung term. He's not able to kind of comfort himself. He still needs an external anima, because an anima is the female version of himself, and he uses Anna as his anima, which is anima. They kind of quite.
Oh yeah.
There's loads of stuff in that scene, and there's also this thing of I was talking about synchronicity and the idea of. You probably know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sure, why not?
I said that synchronicity was like coincidences, right?
Yeah.
And in this scene, Anna says this thing about, I was thinking about you, and then you just turned up. It's that kind of mysticism that I was talking about, which is kind of cool. And there's loads of other things, but we'll just move on to the next scene. So the next scene is when Roger goes to check on Cooper and to make sure that they're on the same page about this merger. Do you have any thoughts on this? I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I know that you probably find it boring.
I don't find anything new in the scene. Like, he goes on about how he loves, what's her name, Jane.
Yep.
I love Jane. I'm so happy. Okay.
Yep. Well, what's really, I guess it's funny that you say that you don't find anything new in this scene, because it's essentially, for me, it feels like a rerun of the scene with him and his sister. They're basically doing the same thing. In fact, they say the same thing in both scenes, which is it's a merger. And I feel like that's trying to say something about how Cooper, even though like Cooper's supposed to be this kind of like, you know, captain of industry, he's like really cunning, he's like, for the time, he's like a billionaire or whatever, very, very powerful man. But in these two scenes, he's trying to please everyone. He's trying to kind of like, he for his sister, he's given her everything. He's like made her a millionaire, made her rich, and all this kind of stuff. And she kind of helped him in return as well. But with Roger, he's sort of like looking after him, trying to sort of like almost be like this almost matronly figure to Roger, like looking after his like needs and stuff, and not really thinking about his own. And it's almost like, you know, in the previous scene with Don and Anna, like Don kind of needs Anna to be this female side of him, and it's almost like Cooper is trying to be this feminine side of Roger. I think, or maybe it's the other way around, I'm not entirely sure, but like we see the two of them, we see Cooper try to bend over backwards to accommodate him in the same way, but it doesn't really work. They're not on the same page, even though Cooper's making himself on the same page. He's not saying no, he's not pushing back on Roger, which is what he should be doing if he wants to do what he wants. So yeah, that's how I feel about that scene. But we should just move on. Okay, so I think you're gonna like this scene. I think this is probably one of your favorite scenes. I'm just guessing.
Go on.
This is the scene where Pete argues with his father-in-law about Trudy.
I mean, he's just found his balls. I mean, I like that he doesn't back down.
Yeah.
Because first of all, like, Trudy getting her dad involved. Wow.
Well, I guess. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Really good
But
point.
This is the thing, it's a power struggle, because I don't know what his name is. What's his name?
No, it's not Eugene, is it? Tom. Yeah.
So Tom thinks that he's the head of the household.
Mm-hmm.
He clearly
Another king.
Well, this is what I mean. Is there's a king here, who thinks that he rules things that he doesn't rule in Pete's opinion.
Yeah.
And it's like he has this empire. What he does is he effectively tells Pete that the only reason that they went with him is because he was in that company, and it had nothing to do with his talent.
Yeah.
Because they say, you know, that Clearasil is doing really well, and blah blah blah, and he sort of dangles this, we're just gonna put it on hold in case, you know, things change or whatever. And it's a clear attempt at manipulation.
Yeah. For me, this scene, what's really interesting is this scene starts off with Pete on dictaphone, sort of talking into a dictaphone and explaining this. He does. I'm not even going to attempt to do the monologue he does, but if you listen to the monologue, it's so hard to follow because everything gets lost in the details. You don't really know what he's talking about. It starts off kind of making sense, and then it just gets more and more sort of convoluted as he goes along, and that's kind of from a Carl Jung perspective. It's kind of how our complexes work, where, you know, when you're a kid, like I said, you get bitten by a dog, or, you know, you might even, I don't know, someone says something to you in the wrong way, and you kind of don't notice it at the time, but another person says it, you don't notice it at the time, and then all of a sudden the word cake can mean something like really bad to you, and you don't know where it came from. It's just this thing that popped up out of nowhere. And that's kind of what happens in this scene, because like when Tom phones him up and tries to talk to him, they kind of never actually say what they're talking about. It's all this kind of like under the radar kind of like, you know, you're gonna lose the account, but, you know, don't worry about it. It's just we're just kind of things under review. And Pete is trying to Pete's credit, he stays almost kind of focused on what's actually being said and says, like, asks him outright, like, what are we talking about? Is this about Trudy? You know, he's kind of very sort of, strongly kind of believing in himself and not kind of just going along with things. And, you know, which is, I guess, what he's done up until this point. He's like always kind of been swept along. And now he makes a decision to stay where he is and sort of like pick a side and essentially just free himself. And I think that's kind of what Cooper isn't doing. Cooper's kind of like letting Roger just kind of almost walk all over him and just kind of like tell him what to do, and he's kind of just going along with it, even though he probably wouldn't see it that way. But I do like the whole how that's sort of encapsulated in that monologue at the beginning, where it just makes no sense. If you listen to it, it's really funny. There's other things we could talk about, but we're going to move on to the next scene, which is this interesting flashback where Don talks about getting married to Betty.
Oh yeah, and then he asks her for a divorce.
Yes. What do you think of that? If
I
anything.
thought it was a good scene.
Yeah.
I thought it was like
It's interesting to see interesting to see Don smiling.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Like, first of all, sorry, the
cat's just staring at us. I think he's looking at this cup that I'm drinking tea from.
He's probably wondering what we're eating. Yeah. Hang on, it's gonna come to me.
Go on.
Yeah, I think it shows, first of all, that Don and Betty were actually in love at one point, which I don't think we've actually ever seen.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I
don't think I've ever, because he comes in and he's like gushing about her.
Yeah.
She's really pretty. She's from a good family. It's almost like he's trying to convince her that this woman is a good match for him.
That's interesting you say that, because I think when he's saying all those things, they all seem to reflect well on him. Like, she's really pretty, she really likes me, she's like, and it's all about him. So you say that he loved her at one point, but I think there's something about Betty, not just how it sort of reflects on him, but also how she reminds him of Anna. Also, another thing, before we go on, this is like a bit of a sidebar. Anna begins with A. She's the first person he's married to. Betty begins with B. There might be somebody else who has a C in their name. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no. Oh my gosh. ABC, easy as 1, 2, 3.
Anyway, back to the thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I think there's something about the way he talks about Betty that's kind of a bit sus.
I don't think it is. I feel like, I mean, yeah, he's sort of going, he's sort of trying to big himself. But I think that's more a case of him almost trying to impress her. A bit like, you would try and impress it's almost like she's his mother and he's going like, she's great, she's from a good family.
Totally,
yeah. You'd love her. He's almost going as far as that. And then...
Sorry, go on.
And then she says, because then he asks her for the divorce, and then she's like, "Oh, there's going to be another Mrs. Draper."
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. So when you say it's like his mother, and there's going to be another Mrs. Draper, that to me is recalls another Carl Jung concept, which again is the archetype thing.
Right.
So archetypes are basically, it's hard to describe what archetypes are. I don't know. Archetypes are... So you got archetype symbols, right? An archetype symbol is like the Mountain King, or an archetype symbol is a mother, or an archetype... These are symbols of an archetype, which is kind of like something within us that kind of tells us those things exist. Mm. So like we know what a mother is because we have an idea of a mother, and then we see someone who's like kind and nurturing to us, we see that person as a mother. And that's basically how Don sees Betty. He sees Betty as an archetype of Anna. Does that make sense?
I guess.
I hope it does, because like I've only just found out about this stuff and I'm trying to make sense of it. But also, what was the other thing you said?
There's going to be another Mrs. Draper.
And there's going to be another Mrs. Draper, which is, again, another archetype. An archetype of Anna, which would be Betty.
So there's one thing that you haven't brought up in this episode yet, and you always bring it up at some point.
Go on, I've probably forgot because it's been so long.
Is there something in this episode that's about a triangle? Because Because I mean, there's a really good triangle right here.
I guess there is. I think because mainly the whole thing with the triangles is it's quite a Jacques Lacan thing.
Oh, it's not none of this. That doesn't go with Mr. Young's.
It doesn't.
work.
Well, it does, but it's not as it's there, but it's not in the same way. So I'm kind of the way I'm talking about this. So like for instance, when like the whole mother father thing and kid, that's kind of like a triangle. So you've got like, you know, the mother is one side of it, and the kid is like the real or whatever. But it's there. It's just not as obvious as it normally would be. But yeah, I guess there is a triangle.
I mean, I'm just mucking about, really. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is something slightly disconcerting about him asking her for a divorce, even though they've never technically been married. But I know it's illegal. It's a bit of paper.
Yeah.
But there is something a bit strange because she is sort of like, she doesn't make a joke of it. She's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, totally. She just goes
sort
on
of
with
like, and it's funny that they never thought to get divorced before as well. I mean, it's unclear how long they've known each other, but she says, and is it this scene as well where he says, she says, oh, we won't be able to spend Christmas together anymore?
Yes, it is.
Because it is like, that's again something you do with your family. Like it's almost like the first time you spend Christmas away from your family.
Yeah.
Which at 35, I've never not seen my family at Christmas.
I have not seen my family at Christmas once.
But when?
Recently.
Yeah,
recently.
But that's unusual though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like normally Christmas is the time
Yeah.
when you return to your family at some point. You know, it's almost a pilgrimage like every year.
I guess it is. Yeah.
That you make. And it's funny because I guess she's saying, oh, that pilgrimage is over, which is what happens when you grow up and start a family, which neither of us have done yet. But it is like, it's an interesting one that there's probably something in that, but I don't know what it is right now.
One thing that I want to say before we move on, this scene is basically top and tailed with Don lying on a couch. And the scene before it was Pete taking a stand and being very strong and very sort of like changing the dynamic with him and Tom, right? And I think this scene is about Don's kind of comfort and reluctance to change. I think it's the first time we see it. So like it's like him lying on the couch is like symbolic of him being really lazy. And obviously, like I've been saying about how Betty is essentially just the same as Anna, and he's just refusing to change. So when it ends with him lying on the couch as well, it's kind of like I think we're entering a new part of the show or the episode where we're talking now about people refusing to change or things changing despite the things around them not wanting them to change. So the next scene that we see is Peggy making her pitch.
Oh, I like this. I think it was a good pitch.
Yeah, it was really good.
Really good pitch.
Really confused me at first, but yeah, I guess there's a lot more of the Christianity thing in there.
Yeah, so I didn't get what he was like. Is it like a religious reference when he was like, I feel like I recognize her?
Well, this is it. So I didn't understand what was going on there at first. And for ages, remember we haven't done a podcast in 6 months. For ages, I was trying to figure out what does that look like? Like what?
It's just like that, isn't she? It's just like,
yeah.
Is it like Jesus on the cross?
And you can find Jesus on the cross. You can find like Mary Magdalene on the cross. You can find all kinds of things that look like that. But that's not the point. The point is, again, it goes back to that archetype thing, where archetypes are things that we recognize, even though we don't actually know where we've seen them before.
Yeah.
They're just things that we instantly connect with. And I think that's the point of that. And that's the point of this whole scene is Peggy kind of almost breaking an archetype and like becoming something else and coming out of that. It starts off with it relates to the previous scene in that, like, in the previous scene Anna tells Don Betty is a chance at a new life, and this scene is literally Peggy starting a new life. It's like starting something new, and like
Yeah. She's kicking ass.
She's kicking ass, yeah. It ends in a weird way where this guy says, I love popsicles at some point in the thing. Oh, there's also the thing that, there's also this, you take it, break it, share it, love it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to go into it all, but that kind of breaks down into some like real talk about patriarchal figures and how women have taken over from the patriarchal figures and calling the shots at the end. The way it's kind of, so I've got this glossary of words that the show uses.
I did not, but continue.
So
that's not super nerdy.
Not at all. Not at all. So basically, go through the show, you can figure out like all the words in the dialogue have multiple meanings, right? And I've made like a glossary of words and what they mean in other contexts, and how they kind of, every time they show up, they kind of mean the same thing. So
cool.
Yeah. I'm single. Anyway, it shakes out that this kind of, it does kind of point to some sort of feminine kind of takeover. It's just really interesting use of words. But it kind of ends, the whole scene ends with this guy saying, I love, people want to say I love popsicles. Like, people always say I love popsicles. And there's this quote that Carl Jung uses, which is this. It's, where love reigns, there is no will to power. And where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking. And I think there's this weird thing about, like, domination. We see all these characters, all these dominating characters in the episode. Yeah. And this idea of love and loving popsicles, to me, has this, I don't know, there's a kind of connection of how love and power kind of go together. And how when people say, I love popsicles, what they're kind of saying to me is, I love power. Right? And as
they're phallic as well.
I didn't say anything about phallic. I haven't seen any mention of Jung and his love of phallic things. I'm sure there is some stuff out there. Anyway, but the next scene is about, for me, the next scene is a lot about power and how people use it and how people kind of abuse it. And it's a scene where Betty gets her kicks by tormenting Sarah Beth. This is like if this was the 80s and this was in a TV show, it would be in Dallas, and it would be Alexis or wherever she was, just being an outright bitch. I mean, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating scene to watch. What did you think?
Well, this is the thing with this scene, is it's really fucking random. It's really random. It's right. Like,
but it's got.
She just rings up.
It was set up though. It was set up a long time ago. When she kind of got the two of them together.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, okay.
I know what it's about,
right.
But it was just really like random that she just chose to pick up the phone and like antagonize a friend.
I think if in the sort of order of the show, I think we don't actually see that much of Betty, do we? I guess we don't. We only see that she's alone at the beginning of the show, and she's kind of.
But something weird about Betty in this episode. Now, my memory is sketchy at best, but this is the first episode where I don't think I've seen her wear a dress.
Oh, interesting. I
think she wears trousers because every single scene, and you know how I know that is because I look at her and I'm like, I fucking wish I looked like you. Like, she's got the most amazing figure.
That's really good.
And I was just watching, and you can see it more because she's wearing trousers.
Yeah.
Because normally she's got one of those huge skirts on, or like. So you're just like, wow.
And it's interesting that this is about kings. And she is, I think in this episode, she is a weak king. She's like a bad king.
I mean, yeah. She's a bad mother. She's a bad king. She's bad everything.
In that she kind of, she takes stuff out on the people around her, and she doesn't really take responsibility, and she isn't nurturing. And everything's about her, basically. But... I think this scene's great. I think it's interesting that, again, we've got Sarah Beth at the top of the staircase, like the Mountain
Yeah,
King
yeah,
on top
yeah.
of the mountain. And also when we see Betty, we see her through this door frame, but she never actually walks through the door. So she's kind of like stuck in the same place, so to speak. And it's just kind of, I think, the way the previous scene with Peggy, one of the things that she's talking about is splitting these things and like sharing them out, right? Someone's like sharing out power. And that's kind of what Ken did at the beginning of the scene. That's what Ken did in that scene. He like basically he almost bestowed this power upon Peggy to do this pitch. She's saying like, Peggy's the one who's going to carry everything forward. She's the one who's in charge now.
Yeah.
And in this scene with Betty's basically hanging on to the power. She's like clinging onto it and using it to just torment her friend. But the twist in the scene is Sarah Beth uses the ultimate power by just putting the phone down. She tells Betty that you're a bad woman, strangely enough, using those specific words, and then hangs up the phone, therefore cutting off Betty from like having any effect on her, which I think is a really, really good scene. It's like really clever.
Yeah, I mean, she is. I mean, her and Cooper are like basically the kings that have no power.
Yeah, yeah.
Because Betty thinks that she has power, but she actually doesn't have any power.
That's good.
Which is, I think that's clear because she's also a bad ruler because her words are exactly as I didn't tell you to do anything.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And it's like that lack of integrity and it's kind of like. It's almost like she won't take responsibility for anything. And that's sort of like why because I mean, that's why she's a bad king.
Massively. There's a reference in here. I've missed out loads of references in the show, but there's a reference in here to the Rockland County Day School, which was a school that encouraged individuality. So that's very much on brand. So the next scene is Peggy getting chewed out by this photocopier repairs man.
Weird.
Making a decision. So you say it's weird. Why do you say it's weird?
Well, he's just really into that machine, isn't he?
Yes. That's a good point.
I mean, he's just a freak. Like I wouldn't want to be in an office with him either.
This is very true. For me, it's a very short scene, but I think again it's totally on brand. The whole thing of like well, the first thing we get is the repairman. I agree that the repairman kind of loves these photocopiers, and it's almost like that's his power, right? That's his kind of like, I have power over these machines, and they're really important to me, and I sort of look after them and stuff. But also on the other end of it, Peggy is there, and she kind of, you see her sort of like almost getting reduced within the scene. And it's like, this, again, it was returned to that idea of shame and like sort of being shamed. But I think what's really important, and also before I go into that, the idea that she's stuck in this room with this machinery, and it's kind of like almost like she is the machine, and she's been put in this sort of hole, and she has to perform this task, and she's not allowed to break out of it, but she does break out of it, and she does that by accessing her shadow. And what's really important about that is being able to talk about the things that shame you, and being able to say when you are shamed, the best way to deal with shame is to kind of like talk about it and sort of tell people, and that way it doesn't like own you, and it doesn't sort of like seep into your personality. And so the next thing she does is she goes straight to Roger and tells him that she wants to be out of that room.
Yeah, and he doesn't give a shit. He's like, yeah, fine. And she's like, really?
Well, this is kind of, this next scene, I guess, is the big talking point in the whole thing. Well, we've got like a lot going on in this scene. The scene starts off weird. It starts off with Peggy asking for her own room.
Yeah.
And then it ends with Joan having a very, very unfortunate incident with...
No. Don't call it an unfortunate.
Okay, all right.
That's not a good way to put it.
Okay, go on.
So it ends with Joan being raped by an asshole.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. So, yeah, I'm gonna leave this one to you because I mean, like, I think it's
interesting because I feel like with Peggy, I mean, you've made it sound like she's coming into herself, she knows, but for me, she's still very unaware of her own power, which I think is demonstrated by how she responds when Roger's like, yeah, okay, and she's like, really? Like, just like that? Like, it's that easy? They can just ask for something and have it?
I think that you've got to remember, she's done all this work and without really sort of forcing the situation. She's basically just been doing what she feels is right. And
I don't think she's doing what she feels is right. I think she is doing her job.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, without ceremony, without sort of like aiming to.
Because she's never asked for anything more. Because she's gotten to the point where, like, it's almost like her being a copywriter in itself is unusual.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like for her to suddenly start demanding everything. It's like, she probably thinks in her mind that she's on a bit of a tightrope, really, and that she doesn't want to overstep.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, she also can't cope with the environment that she's given, sort of, you know. And I think it's because I actually don't really recall her talking to Roger much before.
No, she hasn't. I don't think she has at all, to be honest with you.
But then, you know, like I said, I don't remember much. So, but I feel like it's a very, and this is what I mean about the facing your fears thing. It's like she goes up to him, she just asks, and she's almost prepared for the backlash. Yeah. Because when he's like, oh, okay, yeah, you can have it. She's like, really? And I think she wasn't prepared. I think she was lining herself up for a battle.
Well, I think that's what happens when you face shame, right? Is like, you think if you say something that's kind of embarrassing to you, you tell someone about it, you don't know how they're going to react. You don't know if they're going to sort of say, back off, or if they are kind to you when you say it, it kind of dispels that shame. It goes. I think it's the same sort of thing, same sort of impulse here. It's like, to me, this is similar to when earlier in this, when we've just talked about Sarah Beth kind of like hanging up the phone, using that power and just kind of like going, I'm not interested, and just walking away. But this time, Peggy is kind of like saying, well, I don't want to stay in this room anymore, so I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get out. And she's not forcing the issue. She's just doing what is available to her. She knows that this room, Freddie's room, is there and like no one's using it. So can I just have it? I think it's interesting that...
But she doesn't say... Yeah, but she doesn't say it like that.
Right.
She doesn't say, can I please have that office? She's like, I am a copywriter. I deserve an office.
These are the facts.
Yeah. She goes in and she just says, I deserve this. She doesn't ask him for it.
Right, okay, that's a good point.
And he consents.
That's a good point.
And that's the difference.
Right.
She's not asking him for anything. She's saying, I should have it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Or yeah, exactly. I should be in there.
Yeah, very, very aggressive, I thought.
It is aggressive, but it's not delivered.
I genuinely
it's not. But it's, in a way, for her, it is aggressive.
I think, yeah, I guess. But I think when Roger says it's aggressive, I think he's thinking about if someone else has said that to her, he's almost like projecting what that is like. Like if anyone else has said that to him, any of the guys that said that to him, it would have been an aggressive move. It would have been like, I've done this and I deserve this because I'm blah blah blah. And she's just literally, like you say, just like spitting out facts, hashtag facts. And she totally deserves it. And I think, okay, so here's a thing that I haven't really put a lot of thought into. But how does that scene, how does her asking for that office reflect on the next part of the scene, which is Joan and Greg turning up, and Greg and them saying, and Roger telling Joan that he didn't realize she liked French food. If anything.
There's a thinker. I mean, I don't know. I think it's just queue up and have a go at Roger today. I mean, I think she's trying to do a power move as well, isn't she?
Oh, okay.
Because she's going, well, it's such a classic woman move. Oh, look at my new boyfriend, your ex-boyfriend.
Wow.
It so is.
I had not seen that.
What do you mean?
I didn't know. I literally went over my head.
This beautiful bouquet of roses, And the thing is, it's kind of like, and he's being sneaky as well.
Right.
Because she's like, oh, this is Greg, you know, he's a doctor or whatever. You know, big bucco flowers, we're going out. And he's like, I'm going out too. And where are you going? Oh, French restaurant. And then he's like, oh, I thought you didn't like French food. And they've got a better chef. It's like...
I got the better chef thing. That was a bit kind of, yeah. And it's interesting that no one really says anything. It's all kind of... And, you know, you see Greg's face and it's kind of like when she says, you know... when he says, I didn't know you liked French food.
But have you seen when they walk up, it's almost like they're walking down the aisle.
Oh, right, yeah, that's a good point.
She's got her flowers, they walk up arm in arm sort of thing.
Oof.
And Roger's the priest,
the
for
tension,
whatever reason.
Yeah, totally. The tension in the room, that's, I think it's really good, really tense scene, really tense scene.
But I think the thing with that is at that moment, Joan thinks she has the power.
Right.
We're going to go into this who's got the power thing again.
Okay, that's a good.
But like Joan thinks she's got the power. She's rocking out with a hot boyfriend.
Yeah.
She's engaged or whatever. She's got roses. Like Roger's stood there vulnerable by himself because Jane's not there.
Yeah.
She goes up. She thinks, "Oh, I'm just gonna show him that I don't need him." And like, because you know, you always get this impression that, you know, after you've been dumped, I suppose.
Yeah.
For want of a better word. You know, you want to show, oh, well, actually, I'm fine. I don't need you.
Yeah, totally.
And that's what she's trying to do.
Right.
But I think what happens is it sort of backfires on her because Greg picks up on the fact that
there's something going on.
They know each other
intimately.
But I don't know if he knows that they've shagged, but I think he might have the idea that they have.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that is what that office is full of toxic masculinity.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that whole thing with the office, I think it's talking about that as a space as well. And, you know, we can come back to it, and Peggy is pointing out the fact that the name on the door is still someone else's office.
Yes.
It still belongs to a man.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
He's still there.
We'll definitely talk
and
about that.
And that's the thing, is she goes into Don's office and it's exactly a sort of similar deal, really.
Yeah, totally.
That he suddenly is calling all the shots.
Yes. Well, I don't know where to start with this. I do want to say, like, you know, I spend a lot of this time talking on this show about like things behind the scenes and subtext and stuff. I just want to, you know, make a point of the fact that it is a horrific thing to watch. It's a weird scene to watch, and it's kind of very uncomfortable, and it's, you know, it's really hard to watch. And, you know, obviously we're gonna talk about it, but I want to keep that in mind, that it's kind of it's a tough scene, because I don't want to just go into this coldly talking about it like, oh, the thing with the scene, do you see how they looked at it? You know what I mean? And without missing the point of, like, you know, this is a very, very difficult thing a very triggering thing for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, we probably should put a warning at the beginning of the episode, actually.
Yeah, I will. So I don't want to go into too much detail with what happens in the scene, but have you got any thoughts or any
My thoughts are that, so for me, the big thing was that he approaches when she has her back to him.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a complete, she's let her guard down.
Yep.
Sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's almost seeing her in the way that, now obviously I'm not implying that everyone in the office is a rapist.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's that whole thing of that culture that she's there, she's on display.
Yeah.
And he wants her.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me about the scene right at the beginning of, like, when this happens is we see, like, so Greg opens the door and talks about the fact that it's actually Don Draper's name on the top of the door, which I want to talk about. Don Draper's name comes up a lot in this episode, like when he's not there. It's like, it's almost like, I'll talk about it in a minute, but like he talks about that, and then we see him standing out there. He comes into the door, and we see like Joan walk through the door, like specifically walk, like it's like the biggest sort of, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of doors in this episode, but you see her actually walk through the door, and I think the door is kind of there's a lot of characters in this episode that grow and they change. And I think that's what the door represents. It represents all these characters changing within, due to whatever circumstances there are. But that's very specific and it really stood out to me. But yeah, is there anything else you want to say about this scene?
I mean, I think with Joan, it's particularly hard because I feel like it's not what she not that she doesn't want to be raped. Of course, she doesn't want to be raped, but
totally.
This whole thing was something that she didn't want to begin with.
Yeah, totally.
Like, this is the fact that she went up to Roger, the fact that she's rubbed this new boyfriend in his face.
Yeah.
She's trying to do, which is echoed in the scene with her and Peggy later on. She's doing what she thinks that she should be doing instead of what makes her happy.
Right.
And because she's done that, she's almost like the opposite to Peggy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And it's like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
It's this is what, because I mean, if you think about it, it's like that's almost what happened to Peggy with Pete.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
I mean, he didn't rape her.
Well, I'll go into what I think about how this reflects on Peggy in a second.
But I mean, it was filmed in a very horrific way, and I think what was really like powerful was the look that Joan gave at the end, and it was almost that perspective, like look away. And she was protesting and calling out, but not in a particularly loud way.
Yeah.
She just, and then it was that shot of the chair,
leg, the chair. Yeah. Interesting. I kind of, I feel exactly the same way. The only thing I would say about the Peggy thing, the parallel to Peggy, is this kind of did happen. So I think this show has a lot to say about the way society kind of treats us as people, women in particular, but people in general. And I think there's something about how this horrible thing happens to Joan, but in the first episode in the whole season, in the whole show, Peggy goes to see that doctor, and she obviously it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but obviously she wants to get ahead in life, and this skeezy doctor, remember, basically even the fact that Greg is a doctor, and he says, "Are you going to examine me?" And that's exactly what Peggy says to this. Well, she doesn't say that exactly, but this guy is examining her in the scene. And you say that thing about how she looks away at the end of the scene. Peggy kind of does the same thing in that scene. She looks at that picture, and the fact that she's looking at a chair, and like chairs to me are like these objects. They symbolize objects that are used, and it's almost like she's being used, even though she was trying to, like you say at the beginning of the scene, trying to show herself as a whole human being. That's kind of, there's loads of stuff in this scene where it's like, just Joan kind of trying to be this full woman and having that just like snatched away from her. The way I guess capitalism kind of takes away our humanity in a way. I don't think I talk about capitalism in this show much, but I think that's the overlining thing of the show is that we're not supposed to, as human beings, it's not necessarily natural for us to live the way that we do.
Oh my God, totally.
And that kind of takes a lot of our humanity away, and that's kind of what happens to Joan here. One thing I want to point out, even though, again, there's a lot, they show a lot, and it's very uncomfortable. There is also this thing with Roger. We're all sort of looking at Roger as, oh, he's the good guy in this equation, and he's like the nice person. But I think there's a real sort of parallel between the way that Roger had Joan in that hotel room when they were kissing. We see the same shot of him, pulling up her skirt and, the stockings. And we see the stockings in this scene, and they're quite sort of like similar. I had a massive, well, it wasn't me, but online I was talking, there was a guy who kind of mentioned the fact that he thinks Roger is just as bad as Greg. I don't think he's as bad as Greg, but in a way, because of capitalism, because Roger has this status which is basically just given to him. He almost just walks into any room and thinks he can have any woman he wants, and the woman might not be interested in it, but ultimately because he's got so much money, he can just keep throwing it until he gets what he wants.
It's entitlement.
Entitlement. That's exactly. I keep forgetting that word, but you're totally right. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what the two of them,
I mean,
Greg and Roger, have in common.
There's a lot of ownership of women in this episode.
Yes.
Don owns Anna. Greg owns Joan, and then I mean, you'd even say to a point, Roger owns Peggy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even though it's a room, he could control whether she can have that room.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of. I mean, then there's sort of the opposite with Cooper and his sister.
Yeah.
I suppose, but I don't know. I mean, it does feel like it's one of those things that happens in Mad Men. This scene.
Yeah.
That I kind of feel is never going to be like properly dealt with. I don't know.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I hope she doesn't marry him, but she probably will.
Right. Well, I think the way the scene kind of ends, we see them walk out of the thing, and then nothing is said. Like it's that.
But that's what I mean. She leaves the roses on the table, though.
Well, the roses to me are kind of very symbolic. So the roses to me are kind of like symbolic of this idea of the ideal ego, which is kind of like another posh way of saying being really good or being permissive or just doing what you're told, and trying to live up to this idea of being good. And that's kind of what she does. It's just kind of like lets it go and doesn't really want to address it really, and that's shame. And like I said, I guess the whole scene begins with Peggy kind of confronting shame and battling it and taking it on, and the scene ends with Joan kind of being complicit in shame and not taking it on and not saying anything. So the next scene is this meeting.
Boring. Boring. I just didn't like that story. It just felt. I mean, the only bit that I thought was quite funny was when he was left at the end with all the nice teas and scones.
We all got to that. That's a good little shot. But okay, so we won't spend too much time on this. But I do want to say, so this is the first part of this scene. And
it was in two parts.
It was in two parts, yes. And this first part of the scene is where I guess the thing to talk about in this scene is like, we've just seen Joan be quite complicit in, well, not complicit, but like by not saying anything, it kind of allows evil to thrive, right? And nothing gets changed. And in this scene, we have, Don's not there. And
they make that point, don't they?
Don's the only person, and and we've seen that Don likes to keep things the way they are. And obviously, Cooper's sister is like, "Where's Don?" Because Don could change the whole course of this meeting. He could make things. He could question the fact that they don't want to sell this thing, and even though he doesn't have that much of a stake in the company, he's only got 12%. By saying something to Roger's sister, he could literally change the course of this vote.
Yeah.
But because he's not there, nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And also the fact that Don isn't there, and there's this lawyer there who's kind of like the law. That's almost like the law becomes this static thing, right? And without sort of changing that law, things just like move along. It's like, it's just assumed that he would vote to go along with everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's how kind of laws work, where, if they're a static thing that was written years ago, and now you apply the same, like dowry laws and all that kind of stuff that stick around. We change laws because if we kept them the same, things wouldn't, life wouldn't make any sense. So, there's one more thing I wanted to say about the scene, but I've forgotten what it was. Oh yeah, the eyes thing. The fox. When Roger says to Alice, those fox that I don't know which eyes to look at. Okay, so there's a bit where
I'm just shaking my head for those of you.
There's a bit where Roger says, "I don't know which eyes to look at," and she's got these like she's wearing this fox scarf sort of thing, and like there's like 6 pairs of eyes looking at him. And to me, that's kind of like if it's almost like it's reminding the audience that if Alice is happy to look at this situation through different pairs of eyes, and sort of like she could change her mind at some point, but she doesn't have any opposing viewpoints to go with, so she just goes with the majority. One thing I wanted to mention that we didn't mention earlier, Alice's full name is Alice Cooper.
Like the singer?
Exactly, right? So what's significant about that is Alice Cooper's father was a bishop. And Alice Cooper, at one point, I'm pretty sure, called himself the Dark Prince or something ridiculous like that.
Right.
And it's very much a shadow kind of situation where Alice Cooper is the shadow of his father. Another parallel that's in the show. I just wanted to point that out. Anyway.
Hell's bells, Fola.
Anyway, so moving on. So the next scene, you probably didn't. Maybe you did remember this. The bit where Don is walking down the road and he sees
talking to the freaking mechanics. I was like, what is this? Like, honestly, these are the bits of Mad Men that infuriate me. Because I'm just like, why is it there? Like, oh my God, seriously. I tell you what, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't love this show.
Right.
I don't. I'm just going to put it out there. Right? Because it's sometimes you're watching it and then it'll just do this completely random scene and you're just like, what the hell was that about? Right. And then you think, and this is why when I ask you sometimes, I'm like, I'm your average human being who likes watching like proper rubbish Netflix dramas and stuff like that. And I watch this and I'm just like, why is he's like, oh yeah, I'm looking for a job. Do you make them yourself? And he's like, oh no, I don't make them. And I'm just like, why am I learning the history of this weird mechanic man? It just doesn't seem relevant. And I'm just like, I'm sure it says something, but I don't really need to know. Like, it doesn't make any difference to how I view the show. I think Fola might have a stroke in a minute, so I'm going to stop. But yeah, there you go.
Well, fair enough. So you might be surprised to know that
it's the most important scene in the entire series.
So that car, right, that the guy's making up is so. You know, let's talk about complexes.
Yeah.
And how complexes are like a bundle of emotions that are in our psyches that kind of reflect how we feel in the moment, right? So that car that the guy's making at the time is basically a bunch of different cars blended together. So it's like a complex. Mm-hmm. But the weird thing is, a complex is a personal version of an archetype, right?
Right.
So like an archetype is a societal version of a complex. So lots of things that happen in the past affect what archetypes are and how we sort of like view archetypes. I don't want to go into too much detail. But anyway, well, another thing that's interesting about that car that the guy's making up that's made up of all these different cars is it kind of reflects all the people in the meeting in the previous scene. So you've got 2 parts from I'm not going to go through all the cars, but there's 2 parts from cars in the same family. There's a really posh part of a car, and there's a really sort of downtrodden part of a car, which would be Don, right?
Right.
And so that's why the car's there. But then this whole scene for me is again a reflection on the idea of time, because it's like you don't even know what time this could be in the past, it could be in the only reason we know it's in the current day in the show is because he says, I used to work in a car sales thing, and even then we're not fully sure that it's in the present time in the show, right?
You think it's from the present? I thought it was from the past.
Exactly. That's the point. I think it's from the present, but it could easily be but the point is that it's like it goes back to that thing of time where complexes kind of affect us at all times in our lives. And sorry, you're just looking at me.
Do you want to know my main takeaway from that scene?
Go on.
It's that the guy he was talking to was drinking beer from a jug. Like, honestly, I think it was a Pyrex jug. Like, this is how much attention I paid to the jug because I was not engaging with the dialogue. I was like, is that guy drinking beer out of a jug? Wow. And it's half full. What does that mean? No, I'm joking.
One of the things that kind of stands out to me was the fact that the car. So I think the big point of this scene is the fact that Don is kind of, to me, it's like Don is stuck in the past, and he gets given an opportunity to kind of either stay with these guys and like get a new job and like be a new person and change, or he could go back into the past. He can go back to his old job, back to his old life, and live that. But he doesn't really make a decision. He says, maybe I'll come back, I'll give you a call. And to me, it's like it's the fact that he doesn't make a decision. It's the fact that he's not sure what to do. Like, should he stay? Should he go? And that's where problems begin.
Because he doesn't have enough of those.
Exactly. But then there's this whole thing of nostalgia as well, and how nostalgia can kind of call you back and make you want to, stop you from progressing with your life. And like, this idea of comfort still, this idea that he's still stuck in this idea of comfort. I really like this scene. Yeah, it is a bit random, but it does inform what's going on in the current
to
day.
You. To me, it was just like, oh, okay. It's like he's gone for a walk. It's like a random. He's gone for a walk and just met some guys and been like, let's chat about cars for a bit, and then that's it.
So then we go back to the meeting, and they're having this conversation, and they had the vote, and in the vote, everyone kind of votes to kind of sell the company, and Cooper doesn't want to do it. But has to do it because he's given up, because he can't really, there's nothing else for him there's no one to back him, basically. And it's almost like Don would be that person to back him, but he's off doing something else. And also this idea of apathy and not really caring and not really making a decision. There's a line at the end of this scene. I can't remember what the line is now. I don't know if I wrote it down. Oh, that's it. It's well done. Cooper says well done to Roger. And it's the same line. I think it's Cooper who says it. It might have been Roger who says it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the same line. That's the only other time that line has been used was when Cooper said to Don, well done, when Don told him that he'd hired Duck instead of Pete to run the company. And that's
is that not convincing?
And that's significant because that's the very same scene where Cooper said to Don and Pete, it doesn't matter that Don isn't really who he says he is. And that's significant because if he had said something, if he'd have actually made a decision in that moment, none of this would be happening. And it can all be sort of taken all the way back to that point. And that's why they're selling the company now. Because Duck is the guy that's selling the company. So when he brought him on, it was almost like the beginning of the end. And Don's not even there now to kind of stop it. Do you see the levels?
Well, no, because that's just life, isn't it? I mean, it's just like everything that happens leads to the next thing that happens.
Well, yeah, totally. But I like the fact that there's just a complete through line to that one decision that he made, and not even a decision that he made, a decision that he didn't make. And again, back to the whole theme of the show. That's another thing about Carl Jung.
It's just another thing about Carl Jung. Right, what's next?
Right, next. Moving on. We're almost at the end now. So Peggy moves into her new office.
Lovely scene.
It's a interesting scene.
I mean, I think there's this thing where it's interesting because I think Peggy's almost treating it like they're both happy. So they're both winning at life.
Yes.
Like, she doesn't question. And I think,
notice.
well, that's the thing. She doesn't even notice because Joan almost has the words to say that make her life seem impressive. It's like anyone, isn't it? It's like that. This is like the Instagram of the 1960s. Oh, well, my husband, my fiance is a doctor. He does like really good work, you know, for these poor kids that really need it. Yeah, well, I didn't want to say that, but you know, and it's really complicated. So he's so smart. But again, it's all about him. It's not about her. Yeah. She doesn't talk about her. She doesn't like.
She didn't talk about herself at all.
No, she doesn't. And it's that whole thing of like, it's the room is interesting because it's got someone else's name.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's like, she doesn't mention his name. Does she mention his name?
I can't remember actually.
But I feel like she doesn't say his name.
They do mention Freddie at points.
But they don't. I don't think she says at any point like, "Can we get Freddie's name off?" She's just like, "What are we going to do about this? When can you get it sorted?"
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting because it's almost like the name is sort of the ownership.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. It feels like, I think that scene for Peggy is very much like, aren't we both doing great?
Isn't life great? It's fantastic for both of us. And to be fair, for me, I think this scene's really about Joan, and I think it relates back to the previous scene in the at the end of the previous scene, we see the scene end, and it's that thing you talked about where Cooper's sitting there on his own, and as the camera pans out, you see the door, the shape of the door, and it's like he's stuck within this door. He hasn't moved, he hasn't grown, and he's been trying to please all these people, trying to be matronly in a way, trying to be the good mother or whatever, and he's lost. He's trying to please everyone, and he's lost. He's left with nothing. He's left with not his company. Everyone else has got what they wanted, and he's alone. And I think the same thing has happened with Joan, where she spent this whole time sort of living within this this patriarchy, let's say, and you know, trying to be the best version of that she could possibly be, and being that thing. And she's left basically just kind of almost like a shell of herself. And
but it's that thing. It's a thing that what it's saying to me is that nobody really owns anything.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because
okay.
I mean, Cooper doesn't own his company. Right. Peggy doesn't own that room. Whether or not, you know, it doesn't matter whose name's on the door. It was someone else's room.
Right. Okay.
Like, she's treating it like.
That's a good point.
And it's almost like
that's a really good point.
Yeah. I feel like some of it comes back to what you were saying about capitalism, doesn't it? And it's like people are holding on to these things.
Yeah. And also the fact, for me, the big thing of the scene is like, if you think about like a sine wave, like two sine waves, and like, you know, you've got like with Peggy, it goes up. She's in an up position at the moment, but she will be going down at some point. Yeah. And like Joan's doing the same thing, but in the opposite direction. So they're kind of like, they're meeting. They're almost like, you know, now that Joan is up, now that Joan is down, Peggy is up, and you know, it'll all flip over again at some point, and it's all very temporary. And yes, they don't own anything. Nobody owns anything. It's kind of, you have to give it away at some point.
But at the time, you know, the thing that makes it okay, the thing that levels the playing field as a success. I mean, as it said to Cooper sort of early on, well, you'll still have millions of pounds or whatever, and you'll still have this. And it's like, Joan will still have, or her success is her husband's or her partner's success. That's what she uses as her currency.
Yeah, I guess.
And it's kind of like everyone trades in success, but you know, nobody really owns anything, if you see what I mean. It doesn't belong.
What did you think of the guys' reactions in this? So the guys come in and they're just kind of like, they're all sort of happy and jolly that what's his name,
Paul's back.
Paul's back, And then they find out that Peggy's got this new job, and their faces totally drop, and everything about them changes. Can I tell you what I think?
Yeah.
So another thing that Carl Jung is famous for is this idea of a persona.
Yeah.
And this idea that, we all walk around with a persona, showing our best selves to everyone.
Yeah, totally.
And that's exactly what Joan's doing, where she's talking about all the good stuff in her life. And but the problem with the persona is it can kind of slip quite easily, and that's what happens with the guys. But when their persona slips, they literally, all the nastiness, the shadow comes out, and it's like, how could you get this job, and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I just think that's really I thought it was really funny the way they did that. There's other things as well, but I think we should move on because you might fall asleep.
It's getting to that point. I'm not gonna lie, we're on the what's the saying? The precipice. We're on the precipice. Is that right?
We're almost over. Yeah, we're getting to the end. It's okay. Right. So this the next scene is Betty seemingly trying to bond with Sally. What did you think of this?
Okay, blood thing was weird. Didn't quite get that, because I mean, you could only assume because you couldn't see anything that it was menstrual blood that she was talking about.
Maybe.
But then that seems like a little bit odd.
So to me, I mean, that could be the case. Also, the bleeding. There's only other one reference to bleeding in this show, and that is when Jane tells Don that Sally was trying to phone the office looking for him, and there's something about that scene, like, so I don't know if you remember that. You probably don't remember the scene. It's when Jane was being really nice to Don, and Don was kind of Don was basically being nasty to her. And to me, everyone else thinks that that's Don turning down Jane. But to me, that's Don negging Jane and trying to get her to kind of make the move with him, because he doesn't want to make the move. And it's like this kind of idea of a hidden motive, and he never really says it, but really what he's trying to do is trying to get her to sort of pay more attention to him. It doesn't really work. She ends up with Roger. But I think this scene kind of relates to the fact that Peggy shutting the door on Jane is the same way that Sarah Beth hung up on Betty, right? And now we're seeing the effects of how the people who get the door shut on them, how they act. Because in the last scene, with Peggy and Joan, it's not as obvious, but Peggy shuts the door on Joan. It's almost like, 'cause Peggy kind of is the one who's got all the power, and then Joan's kind of left. So you're so tired now.
This takes a lot of energy.
I know it does.
A lot of intellectual energy to discuss this fucking random TV show with you.
I know. I'm sorry. We'll get over it. We'll finish it. But I think what we're seeing now is Betty basically being responding to having the door shut on her by sort of like basically abusing her daughter, even though it doesn't seem like she's abusing her. Would you agree? Would you disagree?
I don't know. I didn't see it that way.
Right.
I probably saw it more like Betty has realised that the only power she truly has is over her children.
Right, yeah. That's kind of what I was saying.
Is buying their affection,
yeah,
which is what everyone in this show does. I mean, it's all about money. But I think the blood thing for me is probably a bit more like, I mean, I can only assume it's menstrual blood because it's never mentioned otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reminder that she's a woman.
Okay. Fair enough.
If you see what I mean, because she's sort of the whole way through, like, she doesn't have to answer to anyone.
She's been quite masculine, I guess.
I wouldn't even say she's been masculine.
Well, she kind of has, because she's had to replace Don in a way.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, absolutely. She's punishing her children when they misbehave or whatever,
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like that's what that is about.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, with Sally, because I was questioning sort of because that thing that was said about the private school.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if Betty has just decided that she doesn't want her to be independent and she wants to make a mini version of herself because it's the riding boots.
Do you know, I wouldn't actually say a mini version of herself. I would say a mini version of Sarah Beth, her friend. So like, because obviously Sarah Beth has now told her to go where to go. It's like, who's her friend? Who's gonna go riding with her and do all this stuff? It's gonna be her. She's basically giving Sally way too much power, I think.
Or, and I'm getting tired, so the theories are going to get ridiculous. But think about this, right? Sally is turning into Betty, which Betty sees when she catches her smoking. Bear with me, okay?
Right, okay.
Right? So then she's like, crap, I don't want my daughter to be like this, so she punishes her.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in this scene, I think it's more like, it's almost a bit like, here we go. It's almost a bit like Betty caught Don cheating.
Yeah.
Tries to punish him.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work.
Right.
So she tries to draw him back in.
Right.
And sort of, I don't know, buy him or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that goes. But I think it's almost like an echo.
Right. Okay. I see what you mean.
Of that whole relationship, because at the same time her Sally's going, where is he?
Yeah.
And she's not asking that question anymore.
Yeah.
She's not asking where he is.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You mean Betty's not asking that
Yeah.
question anymore? All right, I see. Okay. So yeah. No, I see what you're saying. So it's like, so Betty is dealing with the loss of Don by acting like a shit, basically.
But no, that's not exactly what I was getting at.
Okay.
But we'll just leave it there, shall we? Because
I think you had something.
I think
something.
there's a thing where I guess it's that I can't remember if you like a history repeating itself or like whatever your theory was that you talked about. But it's that whole thing of like seeing that it's a pattern.
Yeah.
It's a pattern of, you know, upset and hurt and then loss. And then because it is that sort of like assimilation of almost wanting. She doesn't want to be the weak person that she was.
Yeah. So, okay, I see where you're going. I don't think what I'm going to say is exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
But I think it's along the same lines. So I think that what's happened with Betty now is so she's taken on this masculine sort of thing. And now she's basically using Sally to kind of fill in the gaps. And almost sort of, as opposed to being the adult and sort of taking over things, she's making Sally her opposite. But basically what she's doing is she doesn't want to change. She's got this power. She doesn't want to open up to Sally and tell her the truth of what's happening with her and Don. She just kind of mentions some things sort of like in the same way that Don did, where he didn't tell Anna that he cheated on his wife or anything. He just told her, I turned my brother away, and he didn't tell her the gory details, and he didn't need to tell her the gory details because Anna kind of accepted him, and that's all he really wanted. And all Betty seems to want is to be accepted as well, and she's not telling Sally the gory details of why Don's left or anything. And making herself look good in the process.
So a bit like a little bit of an echo of Joan, really, of sort of
hiding things and not sort of just showing the persona, just showing the good side of everything, and sort of being accepted for that and not accepted for the faults as well.
Exactly.
And yes, I want to. So okay, we're going into the end now. And
what? No way.
Yeah, we're almost finished. And I think that's that idea of refusing to change is basically all over this next scene with Don and Anna. and Anna reading these tarot cards to him.
Yeah.
Big thing about the tarot cards before we go on. The tarot cards are the things that cued me into the fact that this episode is all about Carl Jung. Because tarot cards was such a random thing. Like, you think the cars thing was random? I didn't think that was that random. And like, when I saw tarot cards, I was like, I don't know why they're there. Like, this whole thing has been about Christianity and blah, blah, blah. Well, tarot cards are basically the best example of archetypes that we have. There's so many different types of them. And they were also, when they first invented, they were like these playing cards. But over time, they changed. They grew. They became something different. They became these, like, signs of the occult or whatever. And Carl Jung used these to sort of like explain what he thought. What he thought archetypes were. So you can go through like a whole pack of cards, and everything has an archetype for something that the way we live our lives.
Yeah.
And so that's where it all clicked in my head. And this episode is this scene is basically about Dawn sort of rejecting everything and not wanting to change. My favorite part of this scene is no,
it's fine. I'm just keeping. I can hold my head up. Don't worry, it's all good.
Oh no, I can't. You're gonna have the best night's sleep. Anyway, my favorite thing about this scene is, you see the curtains.
Yes.
It's almost like Don cannot see outside of the room because he can't see further. He can't see into the future. He's scared because he doesn't know what's out there. So he wants to stay within the room, and that's why he can't see the ocean. He says at one point, "I can't see the ocean." But did you have any thoughts about this final season? Sorry, go on.
Not about the tarot cards.
Go on, you go.
But in this scene, is Don fixing a chair?
He is fixing a chair, yes.
Which he never does for Betty.
All right, that's a good point.
He never fixes stuff for her. Do you remember she asked him, and he's always like, "Oh, I'll do it later," or whatever. And then there's that whole one with the Wendy house where he just like...
he doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
That's a good point, actually.
But he's just fixing a chair for her.
I saw the chair as just like an object, and like as Don still being an object. I think Don is an object. He's an object to be used. He doesn't really use his brain to think about himself out of situations. He just wants to stay where he is. And he's used as an object to, as he's the best sort of ad person. He tries to be the best father, even though it kills him inside. Like, he's always doing what other people want him to do, which is why he's so miserable. He thinks he's alone, and he just needs to realize that he's not alone to be happy, or whatever it is that Anna says. I want to say more about this scene, but I think we should move on. But yeah, anything else you want to add about this?
No. Don't think so. I just
like the idea that, I guess this scene is basically it. This is kind of like the cherry on the cake. This is kind of explaining what the whole episode is about, and it really did hit with me. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry. Okay, so
you're having a little moment there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. Anyway, so the scene ends with Anna describing that wisdom is something that you pick up as you learn, and we see the final shot from that scene is Don looking out of the window, right? And he sees the curtains that he can't see out of the window, which transitions to a shot of Peggy looking out of a completely clear window because she can see out of the window, which is why she managed to grow and move on. One thing I want to say about Don before we finish the episode. So Don is never in a scene with a lot of characters, but the characters talk about him as if he is. And there's this thing about, it's more of a Nietzsche thing, but I think Carl Jung kind of addressed it as well. And it's this idea of the death of God, or, God is dead. And I can't remember what the thing is now. But the famous saying that God is dead, right? And I think what's really interesting about Carl Jung is, so he has this real sort of like attachment to Christianity, but I think what his real thing is spirituality, and Christianity is just something that we invent to kind of fill that hole of spirituality. And in this episode, Don is kind of filling that hole for a lot of people. He's this thing that exists, that the archetype that exists, that we all kind of like project our sort of feelings onto. So to Betty, it's almost like the
I think I know what you're getting at.
it's almost like, you know, the picture that they were all looking at, and they all had different ideas of what it meant to them. Like Don is like that picture. It's like, to Betty, he's this kind of like domineering, kind of mean person, and to Roger, he's to Cooper, sorry, he's this kind of like meek kind of person who gets told what to do, and to Peggy, he's this kind of nurturing person who's kind of helpful. And it reflects in all of the characters and their arcs in the whole show, which
even if he's not there, like a god, I suppose.
Exactly.
It's almost a godlike position to be in.
Yeah.
But
totally.
he never witnesses that, so he's unaware of that.
And he doesn't even exist himself.
I guess so, yeah. That's true.
So yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Really nice. And so the final scene is...
And then he goes and gets baptised on the beach.
Well, that's not it. No, we're not there yet. We've got one more scene to go. So we got the last scene where Pete goes and visits Peggy.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
We won't say too much about this. It's just the fact that both characters... Like, one thing that I didn't mention that I think this episode is about as well, I brought it up a couple of times, but growth. Like, growing up and sort of changing and learning, like... becoming wise, like Anna says at the end of the last scene, like becoming wiser and changing with the times. And both of these characters have changed. Both Pete and Peggy have changed. And there's an amazing. It's amazing when Peggy says that she got, like, because again, like with the whole shame thing, Pete is not scared to ask and show some kind of interest in how Peggy got what she got, right? And he says it out. He says, "How did you get this?" And she says, "Because I'm sleeping with Don."
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is such a big thing when you figure that, like, the whole, you know, this whole show is kind of based on the fact that she kind of made a pass at Don and he turned her away. And because of that, she then went to sleep with Pete. And she can laugh at that. That's kind of her embracing her shadow and sort of like accepting who she is and what's happened in the past and being a stronger person and being a whole person. And the same thing happens with Pete, where he's able to kind of like accept that he's maybe not the big dude that he thought he was, and he's able to kind of, you know, maybe not laugh at it, but at least accept that he's not the king of the castle, and it's fine, and like, you know, maybe he'll be better at some point in the future and stuff. Yeah, and there's loads of other things as well, but I don't want to, it's becoming a catchphrase, I don't want to go into too much because you look absolutely shattered. The last thing, we'll just talk about the very last scene, because I think that's important, because I think Don wading into the ocean is... What did you think of that?
It's a baptism.
I think that's part of it. I don't think that's the full story. I don't think it's like, because a baptism kind of suggests some kind of change, right?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's a rebirth.
Yep, exactly.
So it's like being reborn as something new, but also being reborn under a certain leadership or with a certain loyalty.
Right, okay.
To a faith, to whatever it is.
Yeah.
Traditionally a faith, obviously.
I just don't think he's being reborn, though. I think he's almost...
Well, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. So he might be. We might come back next week and be like, "Hi, I'm Don. Nice to meet y'all."
This is a very good point.
You know, I don't know.
Okay, that's a good point.
But at this point, me watching that without knowing what happened, what's ahead,
Yeah.
what joys await me in next week's episode or whatever. To me, it's like a signal that it wants to change in some way.
Okay.
Either that, or I've got to be honest. At first, I thought he might be like trying to kill himself.
Well, that's
like, but then he was like stood there with his arms outstretched, and I was like, no, baptism.
So I think there's so many things you could read into it, because I think he always said that he wants the ocean. And that's like him like wading into the ocean, trying to capture it all, and him sort of like being too much for him and sort of like overwhelming him.
Yeah.
And he can't sort of hold it, but he wants to hold it, and he hasn't hasn't cottoned onto the fact that he can't hold it. Like, he's not wise. I think, there is that thing of like, he could be trying to commit suicide, or there is like a symbolic, the idea of a symbolic death. But that's why I say he doesn't change, because maybe he doesn't die. Maybe there isn't a symbolic death there, because the symbolic death suggests that you change in some way. And I think, without going into spoilers, I think everything he said in this episode has been like, I don't want to change. I'm quite happy with the way things are. I'm quite happy with, the status quo. And the song's called Cup of Loneliness, and it talks about like new life. It talks about loneliness. It talks about Christianity, decision making, and cowardice. Those are all things within that song. So it's all kind of, I guess there is that whole thing of like, that is there, the whole baptism thing, but I think it's a bit of a red herring. I'm gonna put you out of your misery now and end the show.
And that's the end of this week's episode of The Old Fashioned Breakdown. We'll be back in 6 months with our next episode.
I hope we're not back in 6 months. I hope it's a bit quicker this time.
I mean, it will continue to be 6 months if you keep researching into the episodes as much as you do.
This is true. I'm gonna try and curtail that a bit. I think that was a bit ridiculous. Hopefully this year we'll get through a season.
Well, I mean, we've only got 1 episode to go, so until series 3.
All right, cool. You happy? We're done. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Please remember to join our Instagram, because loads of good pictures in there.
There you go.
Is there anything you want to say?
I think I'm all talked out.
Okay. All right. Well, it just leaves me to say, remember, what did I used to say? I forgot.
Remember Sopranos.
Remember, everyone, Sopranos is even better. Is that it? I can't remember. Anyway, that's it. See you later.